"Don't touch my daughter!" The millionaire screamed, but what the nanny did left him speechless. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The March morning air carried the last bite of winter when Dorothy Mae Williams stepped off the Metro North train at the Scarsdale station. At 43, she possessed the kind of quiet dignity that came from raising 3 children on her own in rural Meridian, Mississippi, while working double shifts at the local hospital. Her weathered hands gripped a single worn leather suitcase, everything she owned compressed into one bag for this chance at a new life. The black sedan waiting for her gleamed under the pale sunlight, its driver a stoic man in his 50s who introduced himself simply as Frank. As they wound through the manicured streets of Westchester County, Dorothy Mae pressed her face to the window, watching million-dollar homes blur past like scenes from a movie she'd never imagined being part of. "First time working up north?" Frank asked, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "Yes, sir," Dorothy Mae replied, her Mississippi drawl softening the words. "But not my first time caring for children." Frank nodded, something unreadable flickering across his weathered face. "The Whitmores are particular people. Mrs. Whitmore travels a lot for her law firm. Mr. Whitmore, he's in real estate development. Big projects, lots of pressure." The way he said it made Dorothy Mae sit up straighter. There was a warning buried in his casual tone, something she'd learned to recognize from years of reading between the lines of what people didn't say. When they turned through the wrought iron gates of the Whitmore estate, Dorothy Mae's breath caught. The colonial mansion sprawled across perfectly manicured grounds, its white columns gleaming like something out of Gone with the Wind, but colder somehow. Towering oak trees lined the circular drive, their bare branches reaching toward the grey sky like gnarled fingers. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Frank said, but his voice held no warmth. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a tall, lean man in an expensive navy suit. Richard Whitmore had the kind of polished appearance that money could buy, silver at his temples, skin that spoke of regular spa treatments, and eyes the color of winter ice. But Dorothy Mae, trained by years of working in hospitals to read the subtle signs of stress, noticed the slight tremor in his hands and the way his smile never quite reached those cold eyes. "Ms. Williams, welcome to our home," he said, extending a hand that felt soft and damp against her calloused palm. "I trust the journey wasn't too difficult." "No, sir, it was just fine," Dorothy Mae replied, studying his face. She'd learned early that the first few minutes with an employer told you everything you needed to know about what kind of job it would be. "Excellent. My wife Victoria is in Geneva closing a major acquisition for her firm, but she's eager to meet you when she returns next week." He gestured toward the marble foyer, where a crystal chandelier cast rainbow prisms across cream-colored walls lined with oil paintings. "Frank will show you to your quarters, and then perhaps you'd like to meet Emma." At the mention of the child's name, something shifted in Richard's expression, a flicker of genuine emotion that humanized his otherwise calculating demeanor. It was the first real thing Dorothy Mae had seen from him. Her living quarters occupied the 3rd floor, a converted attic space that had been tastefully renovated. The room was larger than her entire apartment back in Mississippi, with dormer windows overlooking the estate's sprawling backyard and a small sitting area with a television. But despite the luxury, something felt sterile about it, like a hotel room designed to house someone temporarily. "Dinner's at 6, Frank said, setting her suitcase on the bed. "Emma usually eats earlier, around 5:30. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, will show you the kitchen setup." He paused at the door, then turned back. "Miss Williams, Emma's had a few nannies over the past year. None of them stayed very long. May I ask why?" Dorothy Mae said, her internal alarm bells beginning to chime softly. Frank's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Different reasons, I suppose. You'll figure it out soon enough." After he left, Dorothy Mae sat on the edge of the pristine white bed and pulled out her cell phone. The signal was weak, but she managed to connect with her oldest daughter, Keisha, back in Mississippi. "Mama, how's the fancy house?" Keisha's voice crackled through the static. "Big, real big," Dorothy May said, walking to the window. Below, she could see a playground set that looked like it cost more than most people's cars, but no sign of the child who should be using it. "How are Marcus and Shayla?" "Marcus got into Southern Miss like you wanted. Shayla's still talking about that boy, but she's keeping her grades up." Keisha paused. "Mama, you sure about this job? You sound different already." Dorothy May pressed her forehead against the cool glass. "I'm sure, baby. This job pays 3 times what I was making at the hospital. If I can stick it out for 2 years, I'll have enough saved to buy us that house we looked at on Maple Street. All of us under one roof again." But as she said the words, doubt crept into her voice like Mississippi humidity. Something about this place felt wrong, though she couldn't yet put her finger on what. "Ms. Williams?" A small voice called from the hallway. Dorothy May opened her door to find a little girl with honey blonde hair and enormous blue eyes that seemed far too old for her 4-year-old face. Emma Whitmore wore a pink designer dress that probably cost more than Dorothy May's monthly grocery budget. But her tiny shoulders were hunched in a way that spoke of emotional burdens no child should carry. "Hello, sweetheart," Dorothy May said, crouching to the child's eye level. "I'm Dorothy May. I'm going to be taking care of you." Emma studied her with an intensity that was unsettling. "Are you going to leave too?" The question hit Dorothy May like a physical blow. "What makes you think I'd leave?" "They all do," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Daddy says it's because I'm difficult, but I don't try to be difficult. I just get scared sometimes." Dorothy May felt something fierce and protective surge through her chest, the same feeling she'd had when her own children were small, and the world seemed determined to hurt them. "Well, I don't scare easily," she said gently, "and I don't think you're difficult at all. Would you like to show me your room?" Emma's face lit up for the first time, transforming her from a miniature adult into the child she should be. "Really? It has a princess bed and everything." As Emma led her down the hallway, chattering about her dollhouse and her collection of stuffed animals, Dorothy May began to catalogue details that would become crucial in the months ahead. The way Emma automatically avoided stepping on certain floorboards that creaked, how she glanced nervously toward a closed door at the end of the hall. The fact that her princess bed was surrounded by nightlights, far too many for a child her age. Emma's bedroom was a Pinterest-perfect fantasy in pink and gold, with a canopy bed that looked like something from a fairy tale and enough toys to stock a small store. But Dorothy May noticed what was missing: family photos, drawings stuck to the refrigerator, the warm chaos of a truly lived-in child space. Everything was beautiful and expensive and cold. "Do you like stories?" Dorothy May asked, settling into the reading chair beside Emma's bed. "Mommy used to read to me," Emma said, climbing onto Dorothy May's lap with a trust that broke her heart. "But she's always flying on airplanes now." "She sends me videos, but it's not the same." As Dorothy May opened one of the pristine storybooks, she caught sight of Richard Whitmore standing in the doorway. His expression was unreadable as he watched his daughter cuddle against a woman she'd known for less than an hour. "Emma seems to have taken to you already," he said, but something in his tone suggested this wasn't entirely a good thing. "Children usually do," Dorothy May replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "They're good judges of character." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Richard's smile became razor-thin. "Indeed they are. Dinner in 30 minutes. Emma, don't be late." As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Emma whispered, "Sometimes Daddy gets angry when I like people too much." Dorothy May continued reading, but her mind was racing. In her years of working with families, she'd learned to recognize the signs of dysfunction, and they were scattered throughout this beautiful house like landmines waiting to explode. The question wasn't whether something was wrong, it was how wrong, and whether she'd have the strength to do what needed to be done when the truth finally revealed itself. Outside, the March wind rattled the windows. And Dorothy Mae Williams realized that she'd just walked into a story that was far more complicated than a simple nanny position. But as Emma's small hand found hers, she also knew that walking away was no longer an option. Dorothy Mae's first week at the Whitmore estate passed in a careful dance of observation and adaptation. The house operated on a schedule as rigid as military protocol, yet beneath its polished surface, she began to detect the hairline cracks that suggested something far more troubling than mere wealthy dysfunction. Each morning at precisely 7:30, Richard emerged from his home office already dressed in one of his rotation of expensive suits, his silver hair perfectly styled, clutching his phone like a lifeline. His breakfast consisted of black coffee and whatever. Pills he dry swallowed from a small bottle he kept in his jacket pocket. Anxiety medication, Dorothy Mae guessed, based on his increasingly agitated phone conversations. "No, you listen to me, Davidson," she overheard him hissing into his phone Tuesday morning as she prepared Emma's oatmeal. "I don't care what the federal boys are saying. We've got too much invested to back out now. Find another way." Emma, perched at the kitchen island in her school uniform, seemed to shrink into herself whenever her father's voice rose. Dorothy Mae noticed how the child's appetite disappeared entirely on those mornings, pushing her food around the plate until Richard stormed out to his waiting car. "He's worried about work stuff," Emma explained, with the matter-of-fact tone children used when they'd learned to rationalize adult behavior they couldn't understand. "Mommy says Daddy's projects are very important." Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper who'd been with the family for 3 years, proved to be Dorothy Mae's most valuable source of information about the household's rhythms. A small, efficient woman in her 60s, she spoke in careful, measured sentences that revealed more through what she didn't say than what she did. "Mr. Whitmore, he has very particular ways," Mrs. Chen explained while they folded Emma's designer clothes in the laundry room. Before, when Mrs. Whitmore was home more, things were different, more calm. But now, she shrugged eloquently, letting the silence speak volumes. "How long has Mrs. Whitmore been traveling so much?" Dorothy Mae asked, matching Mrs. Chen's careful tone. "Since the new year. Big promotion at the law firm. Very important work in Europe, she says." Mrs. Chen's hands stilled on one of Emma's tiny sweaters. "Little Miss Emma, she cries sometimes at night. Says she misses her mama's smell on the pillow." That afternoon, Dorothy Mae found Emma sitting alone in the massive playroom, surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of toys, but playing with nothing. Instead, the child was staring out the window at the empty playground equipment, her small face pressed against the glass like a prisoner watching the world outside her cell. "Would you like to go play outside, sweetheart?" Dorothy Mae suggested. Emma's eyes lit up, but then she glanced nervously toward the doorway. "Daddy says I shouldn't go out there alone. Bad people might want to take me because we have money." The comment sent ice through Dorothy Mae's veins. While stranger danger was a legitimate concern for wealthy families, something about the way Emma said it suggested fear had been weaponized to control her movements. "Well, I'll be with you," Dorothy Mae said gently. "That's why I'm here, to keep you safe while we have fun." The transformation in Emma was immediate and heartbreaking. Outside in the crisp March air, she became the 4-year-old she was supposed to be, laughing as Dorothy Mae pushed her on the swing, squealing with delight as they played hide-and-seek among the perfectly manicured hedges. But even in her joy, Dorothy Mae noticed how Emma constantly looked over her shoulder toward the house, as if expecting to be called inside at any moment. "My friend Sophia at school says nannies are only supposed to watch you inside," Emma said, as they sat on the grass making daisy chains. "She says her nanny isn't allowed to take her places without her mommy's permission." "Every family is different, baby girl," Dorothy Mae replied, but the comment stuck with her. Was there a reason Emma had been kept so isolated? That evening, as she helped Emma with her bath, Dorothy Mae discovered another piece of the puzzle. The child's back and shoulders were covered in small, and bruises in various stages of healing, too many and too regularly spaced to be from normal childhood accidents. Emma, honey, how did you get these marks? Emma twisted to look at her back in the bathroom mirror, her expression confused. What marks? Oh, those. I fall down a lot. Daddy says I'm clumsy like Mommy used to be. Dorothy May's blood ran cold. In her years working at the hospital, she'd seen enough cases to recognize the pattern, but she forced herself to remain calm. Jumping to conclusions could be dangerous for both her and Emma. Do you remember falling? When it happened? Emma's brow furrowed in concentration. Not really. Sometimes I wake up and they're just there. Daddy says I move around too much in my sleep and bump into things. That night, Dorothy May couldn't sleep. She paced her small quarters, her mind racing through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Finally, she picked up her phone and called her sister Ruby back in Mississippi. "Dot, you sound terrible," Ruby said after hearing her voice. "What's going on up there in rich people land?" "I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong with this family, Ruby. This little girl. She's scared all the time, and there are things that don't add up." "What kind of things?" Dorothy May lowered her voice, even though she was alone. "Bruises she can't explain. A daddy who keeps her isolated. A mama who's never home anymore. And the way she talks. It's like she's been taught to make excuses for things that aren't normal." Ruby was quiet for a long moment. "You remember what happened with little Keisha Johnson back home? Her mama kept making excuses too, said she was clumsy, until that teacher finally called social services." I know. But this is different, Ruby. These people have money, connections. If I'm wrong, and if you're right and you don't do nothing. The question hung in the air between them. Dorothy May knew Ruby was thinking about their own childhood, about the neighbor who looked the other way when their stepfather's drinking got out of hand, about the silence that had protected the abuser instead of the children. The next morning brought the first direct confrontation with Richard. Dorothy May was preparing Emma's breakfast when he appeared in the kitchen, still in yesterday's clothes, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. "Where did you take Emma yesterday?" His voice was steady, but there was something dangerous underneath. "Just outside to the playground, sir. Fresh air and exercise are important for—" "I don't recall giving you permission to take my daughter outside." He stepped closer, and Dorothy May caught the smell of alcohol on his breath, despite the early hour. "Emma has told you about the security concerns." "I'm sure. She did mention something about stranger danger, but nothing." Richard's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, a technique Dorothy May recognized from dealing with dangerous patients at the hospital. "My daughter's safety is paramount. The playground equipment is for show, for when we have guests. Emma knows this." Dorothy May felt her Mississippi backbone steel itself. "With respect, Mr. Whitmore, that child needs fresh air and physical activity. Keeping her cooped up inside isn't healthy for a 4-year-old. For a moment, she thought he might fire her on the spot. Richard's face went through several expressions before settling on his usual cold smile. "Of course, you're the expert. But in the future, please clear any outdoor activities with me first. We have particular security protocols." After he left, Dorothy May found Emma hiding in the pantry, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry," the child whispered. "I didn't mean to get you in trouble. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to tell Daddy about playing outside." "Oh, sweetheart," Dorothy May said, gathering Emma into her arms. "You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups have conversations about keeping you safe, that's all." But as she held the trembling child, Dorothy May realized she'd just been given a clear warning. Richard Whitmore was monitoring his daughter's every conversation, turning the child into an unwitting informant against anyone who might threaten his control. That afternoon, while Richard was locked in his office on another tense phone call, Dorothy May decided to explore more of the house. She found the basement door unlocked for the first time. Richard must have forgotten to secure it in his agitated state. The basement was finished like the rest of the house, with expensive fixtures and plush carpeting. But something felt wrong about the space. There were filing cabinets lined against one wall and a large safe in the corner. Most disturbing was a small room that had been fitted with a heavy door and multiple locks from the outside. "You shouldn't be down here, Dorothy." May spun around to find Frank standing at the bottom of the stairs, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry. I was looking for the laundry room and got turned around," she lied smoothly. Frank studied her for a long moment. "Laundry room's on the first floor, off the kitchen. Always has been?" As they walked back upstairs together, Frank spoke quietly. "Miss Williams, you seem like a good person. That little girl upstairs, she's been through more than any child should have to handle. But this family, they're not what they appear to be. You do well to remember that some battles aren't worth fighting, and some are," Dorothy May replied, meeting his eyes directly. Frank nodded slowly. "Just be careful who you trust, and keep your eyes open. Things around here have a way of happening when people aren't paying attention." That evening, as Dorothy May tucked Emma into her princess bed surrounded by an army of nightlights, the child grabbed her hand. "Dorothy May, will you stay until I fall asleep?" "Of course, baby girl." "Sometimes I have bad dreams," Emma whispered, "about the man who visits when Daddy's not home. He smells funny and his hands are too soft, like he puts lotion on them all the time." Dorothy May's heart stopped. "What man, sweetheart?" But Emma was already drifting off to sleep, leaving Dorothy May alone with the terrifying realization that her worst fears about the Whitmore household might be just the tip of the iceberg. Outside, a March storm was building, and as thunder rumbled in the distance, Dorothy May made a silent promise to the sleeping child beside her. Whatever was happening in this house of secrets, whatever dangers lurked beneath its perfect facade, she would not be another adult who looked the other way. The real fight was just beginning. Victoria. Whitmore arrived home on a Thursday evening in late, marched like a force of nature contained in a designer suit. Dorothy May watched from Emma's bedroom window as the Blacktown car pulled through the gates, noting how the child beside her went rigid at the sight of her mother's return. "Mommy's home," Emma whispered, but there was no joy in her voice, only a strange mix of longing and anxiety that no 4-year-old should feel about seeing her parent. Victoria emerged from the car with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to command. Tall and elegant, with platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe chignon, she moved like a woman who calculated every gesture for maximum impact. Even from a distance, Dorothy May could see the expensive cut of her charcoal suit, the gleam of her Italian leather briefcase, the way she checked her phone while Frank unloaded her luggage. "Should we go downstairs to greet her?" Dorothy May asked gently. Emma shook her head, pressing closer to the window. "Mommy likes to get settled first. She says traveling makes her need space to decompress." The clinical language coming from a 4-year-old's mouth sent another chill through Dorothy May's already growing list of concerns about this family. 20 minutes later, Victoria appeared in Emma's doorway, and Dorothy May got her first close look at the woman who'd hired her through the agency. Victoria Whitmore was stunning in the way that money and careful maintenance could achieve, but her beauty was cold as winter marble. Her grey eyes, so different from Emma's warm blue ones, swept over the scene with calculating efficiency. "Emma, darling," Victoria said, extending her arms in a gesture that looked more like a photo opportunity than genuine affection. "Come give Mommy a kiss." Emma dutifully crossed the room and submitted to a brief, careful embrace that avoided messing Victoria's pristine appearance. Dorothy May noticed how the child's shoulders remained tense, how quickly Victoria released her. "And you must be Dorothy May Williams," Victoria continued, turning those assessing eyes on the nanny. "I'm Victoria Whitmore. I trust Emma has been behaving herself?" The phrasing struck Dorothy May as odd. Most mothers would ask how their child was doing, not whether she'd been behaving. "Emma's been wonderful, Mom. She's a sweet, bright little girl." "Good. I'd like to speak with you privately after Emma's bedtime." "Shall we say 9 o'clock in my study?" It wasn't really a question, and Dorothy May nodded her agreement. As Victoria's heels clicked away down the hallway, Emma visibly deflated. "Mommy seems tired," the child said, with the practiced diplomacy of someone who'd learned to make excuses for adult behavior. "Travel can be exhausting," Dorothy May agreed, though she suspected Victoria's coldness had little to do with jet lag. Dinner that evening was a study in polite dysfunction. The family sat around a dining table that could seat 12, with Richard at the head, Victoria to his right, Emma to his left, and Dorothy May relegated to serving and supervising Emma's meal from nearby. The distance between the three family members might as well have been miles. "How was Geneva?" Richard asked, cutting his steak with precise, controlled movements. "Productive. The merger should be finalized by summer, assuming Brussels approves the antitrust clearances." Victoria's voice held the same professional crispness she might use in a boardroom. "The Hoffman Group is eager to move forward, and the retainer, substantial enough to cover our immediate concerns." Dorothy May pretended to focus on cutting Emma's chicken while cataloguing this conversation. There was something transactional about the way they spoke, even about Victoria's work success. And what were these immediate concerns that required substantial legal fees? "Mommy, I learned a new song at school," Emma piped up during a lull in the adult conversation. "Want to hear it?" Victoria glanced at her daughter with what could generously be called mild interest. "Perhaps after dinner, darling. Mommy and Daddy have important things to discuss." Emma's face fell, and she spent the rest of the meal pushing food around her plate in silence. Dorothy May found herself fighting the urge to comfort the child, knowing that overstepping boundaries this early would likely cost her the job, and Emma any protection she might provide. At 9 o'clock sharp, Dorothy May knocked on the door of Victoria's home study. The room was a monument to professional success: diplomas from Columbia Law School and Harvard, awards from international legal organizations, photographs of Victoria with politicians and business leaders. But nowhere did Dorothy May see a single picture of Emma. "Please sit," Victoria said, gesturing to a leather chair across from her massive mahogany desk. She'd changed from her travel clothes into silk pajamas and a cashmere robe that probably cost more than Dorothy May's monthly salary. "I wanted to discuss Emma's routine and my expectations." Victoria opened a leather portfolio and withdrew several typed pages. "I've prepared a comprehensive schedule that I expect to be followed precisely. Emma's education is paramount. She should be reading chapter books by kindergarten, and I've arranged for a Mandarin tutor to begin next month." Dorothy May glanced at the schedule, her heart sinking. Every minute of Emma's day was accounted for, from 6:30 a.m. wake-up through 8 p.m. bedtime, with educational activities, structured play, and even free time that came with specific objectives. "Mrs. Whitmore, with respect, this is quite intensive for a 4-year-old. Children Emma's age need unstructured playtime. Opportunities to just be children." "Ms. Williams," Victoria interrupted, her voice dropping to the same dangerous quiet Dorothy May had heard from Richard. "Emma is not like other children. She will inherit significant responsibilities someday, and she must be prepared. The world is competitive, and we cannot afford to let her fall behind because of misguided sentimentality about childhood." "Of course. Ma'am, but furthermore," Victoria continued as if Dorothy May hadn't spoken, "I need to discuss some security concerns. Richard tells me you took Emma outside without permission." "Yes, ma'am, to the playground in your backyard. Fresh air and exercise are important for developing." "Emma has very specific security requirements," Victoria cut her off again. "There have been incidents, people who might want to use her to get to Richard and me. She's safer inside, where we can control the environment." Dorothy May felt her patience fraying. "What kind of incidents?" Victoria's grey eyes turned to ice. "The kind that are none of your concern. Your job is to follow instructions, not question our family's security protocols." They stared at each other across the mahogany desk, and Dorothy May realized she was being tested. Victoria wanted to see if she would fold under pressure, become another compliant employee who looked the other way in exchange for a generous paycheck. "I understand," Dorothy May said finally, "but I need you to understand something too. I care about Emma's well-being, all of it. Her physical health, her emotional development, her happiness. That's not negotiable for me." Something shifted in Victoria's expression, a flicker of what might have been surprise or even respect. "Emma seems quite attached to you already. She mentioned in her video call Tuesday that you make the best chocolate chip cookies and that you sing to her at bedtime." The comment was delivered neutrally, but Dorothy May heard the subtext. Victoria was monitoring Emma's communications, just as Richard monitored her conversations. "Emma's a special little girl," Dorothy May said carefully. "She just needs someone to pay attention to her to make her feel valued. Yes, well, emotional attachment can be complicated in households like ours. Staff members come and go. It's better not to let Emma become too dependent on any one person." The coldness in Victoria's voice when discussing her own daughter's emotional needs was breathtaking. Dorothy May found herself thinking of her own children back in Mississippi, how she'd moved heaven and earth to make sure they always felt loved and secure. Even when money was tight and life was hard. "Mrs. Whitmore, may I ask why Emma's previous nannies left?" Victoria's fingers drummed once against the desk surface. "Various reasons. Compatibility issues mostly. Some found our expectations too demanding. Others developed inappropriate attachments to Emma that made their positions untenable." "Inappropriate how?" "They began to think they knew better than Emma's parents about what was best for her. They forgot their place." Victoria's smile was razor-thin. "I trust that won't be an issue with you, Ms. Williams." The threat was clear, but Dorothy May found herself thinking about Emma's bruises, her fear of certain rooms in the house, her careful language about nighttime visitors. "No, ma'am, it won't be an issue." After the meeting, Dorothy May walked slowly back to her quarters, her mind churning. The house felt different with Victoria in it. Colder somehow, despite the expensive furnishings and perfect climate control. She paused outside Emma's door and heard soft crying from within. "Emma? Sweetheart, are you okay?" The crying stopped immediately. "I'm fine, Dorothy May, just having trouble sleeping." Dorothy May opened the door to find Emma sitting up in her princess bed, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong, baby girl?" "I had a bad dream about Mommy leaving again," Emma whispered. "She said she was going back to Geneva tomorrow, but she just got home. Did Mommy tell you she was leaving tomorrow?" Emma shook her head. "No, but she always leaves again. Sometimes I think she likes her work friends more than she likes me." Dorothy May gathered the child into her arms, her heart breaking for this little girl who'd learned that love was conditional and temporary. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm sure that's not true." "Then why doesn't she want to spend time with me? Why does she always look at her phone when I'm talking?" The questions hung in the air, and Dorothy May found herself without answers that wouldn't further damage Emma's relationship with her mother. Instead, she held the child and hummed an old gospel song her own grandmother had sung to her during the dark nights of her childhood in Mississippi. "Dorothy May," Emma whispered as her breathing began to slow, "will you promise me something?" "What's that, baby?" "If you have to leave like the other nannies, will you tell me goodbye? The last one just disappeared one day, and Daddy said she got a better job, but she promised she'd never leave me." Dorothy May felt tears prick her own eyes. "Emma, honey, I'm not planning on going anywhere. But if you do, will you promise to say goodbye?" "I promise," Dorothy May whispered, though she was beginning to understand that promises might be impossible to keep in the Whitmore household. As Emma finally drifted off to sleep, Dorothy May sat in the reading chair and watched the shadows play across the walls. Outside, the March wind howled around the estate, and she thought about the conversation with Victoria, about the careful control both parents exerted over their daughter's life, about the fear that seemed to permeate every corner of this beautiful house. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter Keisha. "Mama, you sound different when we talk now. Are you okay up there?" Dorothy May stared at the message for a long time before typing back, just adjusting to a new situation. "I love you, baby." But as she looked down at Emma's sleeping face, surrounded by expensive toys and designer furniture, but utterly alone in her emotional needs, Dorothy May realized that adjusting might not be enough. Something was deeply wrong in the Whitmore family, and every day brought new evidence that Emma was trapped in the center of it. The question was no longer whether she should get involved, it was whether she could afford not to. April arrived with unseasonable warmth, and with it came the first real crack in the Whitmore family's carefully constructed facade. Dorothy May had been with the family for 5 weeks when she discovered that Victoria's return from Geneva had lasted exactly 3 days before another urgent business trip called her back to Europe. Emergency arbitration in Amsterdam. Victoria explained to Richard over breakfast, her tone suggesting this was as routine as commenting on the weather. The Netherlands Antilles subsidiary is claiming breach of contract. Could be there for 2 weeks, possibly 3. Emma, who had brightened considerably during her mother's brief presence, seemed to fold in on herself at the news. She picked at her organic steel-cut oats without speaking, her small shoulders curved in defeat. "Sweetheart, Mommy has to work," Victoria said, finally acknowledging her daughter's obvious distress. "You understand that, don't you? This is how we can afford all your nice things." The casual manipulation in the statement made Dorothy May's teeth clench. Blaming a 4-year-old for her mother's absence by suggesting the child's material needs required, the sacrifice was psychological cruelty disguised as explanation. "I understand, Mommy," Emma whispered, because what else could a child say? After Victoria left in another black sedan bound for JFK, the house settled into a rhythm that Dorothy May was beginning to recognize as the family's true normal. Richard's phone calls became more agitated. His drinking started earlier in the day, and Emma retreated into an emotional shell that broke Dorothy May's heart. But it was that first Thursday after Victoria's departure that Dorothy May discovered the pattern that would haunt her for months to come. She had tucked Emma into bed at the usual time, read 3 stories instead of the prescribed 2 because the child seemed particularly clingy, and retreated to her own quarters to call her children back home. It was nearly 11 p.m. when she heard footsteps in the hallway below, too heavy to be Emma's, too careful to be Richard's usual stride. Dorothy May crept to her door and listened. The footsteps paused outside Emma's room, and she heard the soft click of a door opening. Every maternal instinct she possessed screamed danger, but she forced herself to think strategically. If she confronted an intruder and was wrong, she'd lose her job and any ability to protect Emma, if she was right. She waited 10 agonizing minutes before creeping down the stairs, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain it would give her away. Emma's door was still closed, but a thin line of light showed beneath it. Dorothy May pressed her ear to the wood and heard voices, Emma's high, nervous whisper and a man's voice she didn't recognize. "Such a good girl. Keeping our special game secret," the unfamiliar voice was saying. "Remember what happens to little girls who tell stories about their special friends." "I remember," Emma's voice was barely audible. "Bad things happen to people I care about." Dorothy May's blood turned to ice. She fumbled for her phone, trying to start a recording while her hands shook with fury and terror. But as she lifted the device, the hardwood floor beneath her feet creaked treacherously. The voices inside the room stopped immediately. Dorothy May had perhaps 3 seconds to decide. Confront whatever was happening or retreat, and live with the knowledge that she'd failed to protect Emma in the moment the child needed her most. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. She turned the handle and pushed open the door. Emma was sitting on the edge of her bed in her princess nightgown, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. Beside her sat a man Dorothy May had never seen before, well-dressed, maybe 50, with soft hands and predatory eyes that made her skin crawl. "I'm sorry," Dorothy May said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I thought I heard Emma calling for me." The man stood smoothly, his smile never wavering. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Dr. Harrison, an old friend of the family. Emma was having trouble sleeping, so I came up to check on her." Dorothy May's eyes swept the scene, cataloging details that would become evidence. The man's expensive suit at nearly midnight, Emma's trembling hands, the way the child wouldn't meet her eyes, the fact that there was no medical bag or any other indication this was a legitimate medical visit. "How kind of you," Dorothy May replied, stepping fully into the room. "But I'm Emma's nanny, so nighttime care is my responsibility. I'm sure Mr. Whitmore will want to thank you for your concern when he returns from wherever he is tonight." The implicit question hung in the air. Where was Richard, and why was this stranger in his house with his daughter? Dr. Harrison's smile became strained. "Of course, I was just leaving anyway." He turned to Emma, and Dorothy May saw the child flinch. "Feel better, sweetheart. I'll see you again soon." After he left, Dorothy May sat on Emma's bed and pulled the trembling child into her arms. "Emma, baby, who was that man?" "A friend of Daddy's," Emma whispered against her shoulder. "He comes sometimes when Daddy has to go away for work." "What kind of friend?" Emma was quiet for so long that Dorothy May thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a breath. "He says he's helping me practice being grown up, but I don't like the games we play." The admission hit Dorothy May like a physical blow. She'd worked in hospitals long enough to recognize the signs, but hearing it from Emma's own mouth made it devastatingly real. "Sweetheart, listen to me very carefully," Dorothy May said, pulling back to look into Emma's eyes. "What games do you play with Dr. Harrison?" "I can't tell," Emma said quickly, fear flooding her features. "He said bad things would happen to you if I told anyone. Bad things happened to Sarah when she told." "Who's Sarah?" "My nanny before Rachel. She tried to tell Daddy about the games, and then she got very sick and had to go to the hospital. Dr. Harrison said it was because she broke the rules." Dorothy May felt the room spin around her. The pattern was becoming sickeningly clear. Predator gains access through family connections, grooms and abuses child, threatens consequences for disclosure, and systematically removes any adults who might discover the abuse. "Emma, I need you to understand something," Dorothy May said, taking the child's small hands in hers. "Nothing that man does to you is your fault, nothing. And no matter what he's told you, you will not get in trouble for telling the truth. But Sarah got sick, baby, but not because she told the truth. Sometimes adults get sick for reasons that have nothing to do with little girls." Emma studied Dorothy May's face with those two old eyes. "Are you going to tell Daddy?" The question revealed the depth of the child's isolation. Emma wasn't asking if Dorothy May would report the abuse. She was asking if she would tell the very person who was allowing it to happen. "I'm going to make sure you're safe," Dorothy May said carefully. "That's my job, to take care of you." The next morning, Dorothy May waited until Richard emerged from his office for his usual coffee ritual. He looked haggard, his usually perfect appearance showing signs of stress, rumpled shirt, day-old stubble, the tremor in his hands more pronounced. "Mr. Whitmore, I need to speak with you about last night." Richard's hand froze halfway to the coffee pot. "What about last night?" "There was a man in Emma's room. He said he was Dr. Harrison, a friend of yours. I wasn't informed that anyone would be visiting Emma, especially so late." For a moment, Richard's mask slipped completely, and Dorothy May saw naked fear in his eyes before the cold control reasserted itself. "Dr. Harrison is Emma's pediatrician," Richard said smoothly. "He makes house calls when needed. Emma was running a fever yesterday evening." The lie was so practiced, so immediate, that Dorothy May realized this conversation had happened before with other nannies. "She seemed fine when I put her to bed," Dorothy May said carefully. "No signs of illness." "Children can spike fevers quickly. Dr. Harrison is very thorough in his care." Richard's voice carried a warning that was becoming familiar. "I trust there won't be any issues with his continued care of my daughter." Dorothy May felt the weight of the moment. Her next words would determine whether she remained in position to protect Emma or joined the ranks of dismissed nannies who'd tried and failed to save her. "Of course not," she said finally. "I just like to be informed about Emma's medical care so I can provide proper follow-up." Richard's smile was sharp as a blade. "Naturally, I'll be sure to keep you informed." That afternoon, while Richard was locked in his office on another crisis call and Emma napped, Dorothy May made her first real mistake. She called the number on Dr. Harrison's business card, which he'd left on Emma's nightstand. The number was disconnected. She tried internet searches for Dr. Harrison in the Westchester area. No pediatrician by that name was licensed in New York State. She expanded her search to surrounding states with the same result. Dr. Harrison didn't exist, at least not as a legitimate medical professional. As Dorothy May sat in Emma's playroom, staring at the business card that was clearly a prop in an elaborate deception, she realized the full scope of what she was facing. This wasn't a case of parental neglect or even accidental endangerment. This was a coordinated conspiracy to abuse a child, with her own father as either an active participant or willing enabler. Her phone rang, startling her from her dark thoughts. It was Frank calling from the kitchen line. "Miss Williams, could you come downstairs for a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you." When she reached the kitchen, Frank was alone, his weathered face grim. "I saw Dr. Harrison leaving last night," he said without preamble, "and I saw you go upstairs afterward." Dorothy May's heart rate spiked. "I heard Emma crying." "I'm not questioning your actions," Frank interrupted quietly. "I'm warning you about the consequences." Rachel lasted 6 months after she started asking questions about the doctor's visits. Sarah made it 4 months. The one before Sarah didn't even make it that long. What happened to them? Frank was quiet for a long moment, staring out the kitchen window at the perfectly manicured grounds. Officially, Sarah had a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized for exhaustion. Rachel found a better position with a family in California. The one before that, well, let's say she decided a change of scenery was necessary for her health. And unofficially, Sarah's in a private facility upstate, heavily medicated, diagnosed with paranoid delusions. Rachel moved to California, all right, after someone broke into her apartment and left photos of her family with their faces circled in red ink. The first one just disappeared one night. Her apartment was cleaned out, her references blacklisted. She's probably waitressing somewhere under a different name. The implications hit Dorothy May like a physical blow. Richard has that kind of reach. Richard's in debt up to his eyeballs to some very unforgiving people. People who value discretion above everything else. And Dr. Harrison, he's not just some random predator who found his way into this house. He's connected to those same people, and Emma is currency in a transaction her father can't afford to refuse. Dorothy May felt the world tilt sideways. "You're saying Richard is..." "I'm saying Richard is trapped in a situation where his daughter's safety is the collateral for his mistakes. And anyone who threatens to expose that arrangement becomes a problem that needs to be solved." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of Emma's situation settling between them like a physical presence. "Why are you telling me this?" Dorothy May finally asked. Frank's eyes met hers, and she saw a pain there that matched her own. "Because that little girl upstairs deserves better than the adults in her life have given her. And because you're the first nanny who's lasted this long while, still giving a damn about what happens to her. What am I supposed to do with this information?" "Be smarter than your predecessors," Frank said grimly. "And remember that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is try to be a hero." As Dorothy May climbed the stairs back to Emma's room, where the child was waking from her nap with the confused, frightened expression that had become her default, she realized that her simple job as a nanny had become something far more complex and dangerous. She was now a witness to a crime, a potential victim of a conspiracy, and possibly the only thing standing between Emma and a continuation of horrors that no child should endure. The question was no longer whether she could save Emma, it was whether she could do it without destroying them both in the process. The first week of May brought unseasonable storms to Westchester County, and with them, a shift in the Whitmore household that Dorothy May felt like electricity in the air before lightning strikes. Richard's phone calls had become increasingly desperate, his drinking more obvious, and his absences from the house more frequent and unexplained. "Daddy's having money troubles," Emma confided to Dorothy May one grey afternoon as they worked on a puzzle in the playroom. The statement was delivered with the matter-of-fact tone children used when repeating adult conversations they'd overheard but didn't fully understand. "What makes you say that, sweetheart?" Dorothy May asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral while her mind raced. "I heard him crying on the phone to Mommy. He said the bad men wanted their money back, and he didn't have it." Emma fitted a puzzle piece into place with the concentration of someone trying to create order in a chaotic world. "He said he was sorry for what he had to do, but he didn't have a choice." The words sent ice through Dorothy May's veins. Frank's revelation about Richard's debts and Emma being used as currency suddenly felt less like paranoid speculation and more like documented fact. That evening, as she prepared Emma's dinner, Dorothy May overheard Richard on yet another tense phone call in his office. The door was slightly ajar, and his voice carried clearly down the hallway. "I understand the timeline, Kowalski, but the federal audit is breathing down my neck. If they find the Cayman accounts before I can clean them up..." Richard's voice broke slightly. "Yes, I know what happens if I default, but there has to be another way. She's 4 years old, for Christ's sake." The line went quiet, and when Richard spoke again, his voice was hollow with defeat. "Fine, but Harrison follows the established protocols. No deviation, no escalation. And you keep your people away from my house during daylight hours." Dorothy May's hands shook as she plated Emma's grilled chicken and vegetables. The conversation confirmed her worst fears. Richard wasn't just allowing the abuse, he was negotiating the terms of his daughter's exploitation to buy himself time with his creditors. "Dorothy May?" Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, her small face creased with worry. "Why do you look sad?" Dorothy May forced a smile, though she felt like her face might crack from the effort. "Just thinking about my own children back home, baby girl. I miss them sometimes. Do you want to go back to them?" The question was asked with the careful neutrality of a child who'd learned that expressing her own needs often led to disappointment. Dorothy May knelt to Emma's eye level, taking the small hands in hers. "Emma, I want you to know something important. I'm here because I care about you. Not because your daddy pays me, not because it's my job, but because you matter to me. Do you understand that?" Emma studied her face with those two perceptive blue eyes. "The other nannies said they cared about me too." "I know they did, sweetheart. But sometimes caring isn't enough if you don't have the right plan. Do you have a plan?" The question hung in the air between them, and Dorothy May realized she was standing at a crossroads. She could continue to gather evidence while hoping someone else would intervene. Or she could take action that might save Emma, but would certainly put them both in danger. "I'm working on one," she said finally, and saw something like hope flicker in Emma's eyes for the first time in weeks. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Dorothy May was supervising Emma's breakfast when the doorbell chimed, followed by the sound of expensive heels clicking across the marble foyer. A woman's voice, crisp and authoritative, spoke with Mrs. Chen in the entryway. "I'm here to see Mr. Whitmore. It's regarding the Harrison matter." Dorothy May felt every muscle in her body tense. She positioned herself where she could see through the kitchen doorway to the foyer, where a severe-looking woman in her 50s stood examining the oil paintings with the detached interest of someone appraising assets. Richard appeared from his office, his face carefully controlled, but his hands betraying his nervousness with their slight tremor. "Ms. Petrov, I wasn't expecting you." Mr. Kowalski felt a personal visit was warranted, given the recent Complications with your domestic staff. The woman's accent was faint, but unmistakably Eastern European. We understand there have been questions about Dr. Harrison's credentials. Dorothy May's blood ran cold. They knew about her research into Harrison's background. Minor concerns, Richard said quickly. Nothing that can't be managed. Indeed. We've taken the liberty of providing Dr. Harrison with updated documentation that should satisfy any future inquiries. Ms. Petrov handed Richard a manila envelope. We trust this resolves the matter. And of course, absolutely. Excellent. Mr. Kowalski also wanted me to remind you that discretion is not optional in our arrangements. Staff members who become problematic tend to experience unfortunate circumstances. The threat was delivered with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather, which made it infinitely more chilling. After Miss Petrov left, Richard disappeared into his office and didn't emerge for hours. When he finally did, his appearance was disheveled and his eyes were red-rimmed with either alcohol or tears. Possibly both. "Dorothy May," he called from the hallway. "A word, please." She found him in the living room, standing before the massive windows that looked out over the estate's grounds. In the afternoon light, he looked older than his 45 years, worn down by pressures that had clearly exceeded his ability to cope. "I want you to know that I'm grateful for your care of Emma," he began, his voice carefully modulated. She's been through a lot of changes lately, with Victoria traveling so much." "She's a resilient little girl," Dorothy May replied carefully. "Yes, she is. But resilience has its limits." Richard turned to face her, and she saw something that might have been genuine anguish in his eyes. "There are aspects of our family situation that are complicated. Business pressures, security concerns, relationships that predate Emma's birth, but affect her nonetheless." Dorothy May waited, sensing that Richard was building towards something important. "What I'm trying to say is that sometimes good people find themselves in impossible situations. Sometimes the choices available are all bad, and you have to pick the option that causes the least harm. Mr. Whitmore, if you're concerned about Emma's safety—" "I'm concerned about everyone's safety," Richard interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp. "Yours included. There are people in my life who don't tolerate interference, and they have long memories for those who cross them." The warning was clear, but Dorothy May heard something else in his voice, a plea for understanding, perhaps even for help, from a man who'd painted himself into a corner with no good way out. "Is there anything I should know about Dr. Harrison's visits?" she asked directly. Richard's face went through several expressions before settling on resigned defeat. "Dr. Harrison provides specialized care for children with Emma's particular needs. His methods are unconventional, but they're approved by people whose opinions matter more than mine." The euphemistic language made Dorothy May's stomach turn. Richard wasn't just enabling the abuse. He was trying to convince himself it served some legitimate purpose. "What needs does Emma have that require such specialized care?" Anxiety, night terrors, behavioral issues related to her parents' demanding careers." Richard's voice was getting steadier as he recited what sounded like a rehearsed explanation. "Dr. Harrison's therapeutic techniques help her process these challenges in a controlled environment." The clinical language was a masterpiece of self-deception, and Dorothy May realized that Richard had probably repeated these justifications to himself so many times that he'd almost started to believe them. "Mr. Whitmore," she said gently, "Emma doesn't seem to have behavioral issues. She's actually remarkably well-adjusted for a child dealing with so much upheaval." Something cracked in Richard's composure. "You don't understand the pressures she's under, the expectations, the threats." His voice dropped to a whisper. "If I don't comply with certain arrangements, Emma won't be the only one who suffers." Before Dorothy May could respond, Emma's voice called from the kitchen. "Dorothy May! I spilled my juice." The moment shattered, and Richard's mask of control slammed back into place. "We should continue this conversation later," he said dismissively. "Emma needs your attention." As Dorothy May hurried to clean up Emma's spilled apple juice, her mind raced through the implications of Richard's half-confession. He wasn't a monster. He was a trapped man who'd made terrible choices and was now so deep in a web of debt and criminality that he couldn't see a way out that didn't involve sacrificing his daughter. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Dorothy May made a decision that would change everything. She called her sister Ruby in Mississippi, but this time with a specific request. "Ruby, I need you to do something for me, and I need you not to ask questions." "Dot, you're scaring me." "What's going on up there?" "I need you to call the Mississippi Department of Child Services and ask them about reporting child abuse across state lines. Don't mention any names, just say you're concerned about a child in New York. Find out what the process is, what kind of evidence they need, who has jurisdiction." Ruby was quiet for a long moment. "Dot, are you in danger?" "Not yet. But I might be soon, and Ruby, if something happens to me, if I disappear or have an accident or suddenly quit my job and stop calling, I need you to know that none of it will be voluntary." "Jesus, Dot, what have you gotten yourself into?" "Something I can't get out of without help. Just make those calls, okay? And be careful about it. Don't use your real name, don't give them your information. Use a payphone if you can find one." After she hung up, Dorothy May sat in her small quarters and stared out at the darkened estate grounds. Somewhere in this beautiful house, a 4-year-old girl was sleeping fitfully, protected by nothing more than her nanny's determination and a locked bedroom door that wouldn't keep out the monsters if they really wanted in. The storm outside was intensifying, rain lashing against the windows with increasing fury. But the real storm was just beginning, and Dorothy May knew that when it broke, it would either wash away the secrets that were poisoning the Whitmore family or drown everyone caught in its path. She pulled out her notebook and began writing down everything she could remember about Dr. Harrison's visits, Richard's phone conversations, and Emma's frightened confessions. If she was going to take on forces powerful enough to make previous nannies disappear, she would need more than good intentions. She would need evidence, allies, and a plan that didn't end with Emma being further victimized by the very system meant to protect her. The clock on her nightstand read 11:47 p.m. when she heard the familiar sound of careful footsteps in the hallway below. Dr. Harrison was making another house call, and this time Dorothy May was ready. Dorothy May's hands trembled as she gripped her phone, the recording app already activated and hidden in the pocket of her robe. The footsteps below had stopped outside Emma's door, and she could hear the soft murmur of voices, the child's frightened whisper, and Harrison's sickeningly gentle tone. This time, she wouldn't retreat. This time, she would get the evidence needed to protect Emma, no matter the cost. She crept down the stairs, each step calculated to avoid the creaking boards she'd memorized over the past 6 weeks. The hallway was dimly lit by the nightlights Emma insisted on having everywhere, casting dancing shadows that made the familiar house feel like a nightmare landscape. As she approached Emma's door, Harrison's voice became clearer. "Remember what we talked about, sweetheart. This is our special time, just like always. And you know what happens to little girls who don't keep their promises about our games." "I remember," Emma's voice was barely audible, thick with tears. "Bad things happen." "That's right. Bad things happen to everyone you care about. Like what happened to Sarah when she tried to tell stories." Dorothy May pressed herself against the wall beside the door, her phone positioned to capture audio, while her other hand gripped the doorframe to steady herself against the rage coursing through her body. "Now, be a good girl and come sit here beside Dr. Harrison. We have some new games to play tonight." The sound of Emma's reluctant movement across the room nearly broke Dorothy May's resolve to remain hidden. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to burst through that door, but she forced herself to wait. She needed enough evidence to ensure Harrison could never hurt Emma again. "That's perfect, sweetheart." Just like that, Now you remember our special rules, don't you? I don't tell anyone about our games, Emma recited in a hollow voice. Don't let anyone know you visit. Don't cry where people can hear. Very good. And what happens if you forget the rules? People I love get hurt. Like Dorothy May. The mention of her own name as a threat against Emma made Dorothy May's vision blur with fury, but she maintained her position, the phone continuing to record Harrison's systematic psychological torture. Exactly. Dorothy May is very nice to you, isn't she? It would be terrible if something bad happened to her because you couldn't keep our secrets. Dorothy May had heard enough. The recording would be devastating evidence of grooming and psychological abuse, even if she couldn't capture the physical elements she suspected were coming next. She pocketed the phone and prepared to intervene, but before she could move, another voice cut through the darkness. What the hell is going on here? Richard stood at the other end of the hallway, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, his hair disheveled and his face flushed with alcohol. But his voice carried a fury that Dorothy May had never heard from him before. Harrison emerged from Emma's room, his predatory smile replaced by cold calculation. Richard, I told you I'd be visiting tonight. The child was having another episode. I didn't authorize any visit tonight. Richard's voice was steel, and Dorothy May realized that for the first time since she'd arrived, he was acting like a father instead of a debtor. Get away from my daughter. I'm afraid that's not how our arrangement works, Harrison replied smoothly. Mr. Kowalski was very specific about the timeline for Emma's treatment. Your financial obligations don't pause for paternal sentiment. I said get away from her. Richard stepped closer, and Dorothy May could see his hands clenched into fists. The deal is off. Find another way to collect what I owe. Harrison's laugh was like ice cracking. Oh, Richard, you really don't understand your situation, do you? You don't get to renegotiate terms, not when you're $3 million in the hole, with people who consider your daughter very adequate collateral. $3 million? Richard's voice cracked. The loan was for $800,000. Interest compounds quickly when you miss payments, as do penalties for defaulting on development contracts. The Riverside project alone has cost my associates $2.4 million when the EPA shut it down. Harrison straightened his tie with practiced calm. Emma's therapeutic sessions will continue as scheduled until your debt is satisfied. Unless, of course, you'd prefer we explore more permanent collection methods. Dorothy May watched Richard's face cycle through desperation, rage, and final defeat. She realized she was witnessing the moment when a father chose his daughter's safety over his own financial ruin, even though it might be too late. There has to be another way, Richard whispered. She's just a baby. She's a very valuable asset in a market where such assets are increasingly rare and expensive. Harrison's mask of professional demeanor was slipping, revealing something inhuman underneath. Your wife's legal connections alone make Emma worth far more than your pathetic real estate ventures ever. From inside the bedroom came the sound of Emma crying. Not the normal tears of a frightened child, but the broken sobs of someone whose spirit was being systematically destroyed. That sound shattered the last of Dorothy May's caution. Get away from that child right now. She stepped into the hallway, her phone held high and recording openly. I've heard enough to bury all of you. Both men turned toward her, but their reactions couldn't have been more different. Richard's face showed relief mixed with terror, relief that someone was finally intervening, terror at what the consequences might be. Harrison's expression was pure, calculating malice. Miss Williams, Harrison said in the same gentle tone he'd used with Emma, how unfortunate. I was hoping we could avoid this particular complication. The only complication here is that you're a predator who's been abusing a 4-year-old child. Dorothy May said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. And that stops now. Does it? Harrison pulled out his own phone and pressed a button. Security, we have a Code 7 situation. Domestic staff interference. Yes, immediate response required. Richard grabbed Harrison's arm. What did you just do? What I should have done weeks ago. Ms. Williams has become a liability that requires professional resolution." Harrison shrugged off Richard's grip. "Don't worry, she'll simply disappear like the others. An unfortunate accident, perhaps a breakdown that requires psychiatric intervention. Very sad, but these things happen to people who develop paranoid delusions about their employers." "You're insane if you think," Dorothy May began, but Richard cut her off. "Dorothy May, you need to leave. Now, take Emma and get out of this house." "I'm not leaving without her," Dorothy May said firmly. "And I'm not leaving you to face this alone anymore." Harrison laughed, the sound echoing off the marble floors. "How touching. But neither of you seems to understand that leaving is no longer an option. My associates are already en route, and they're very thorough in their work." As if summoned by his words, the sound of car doors slamming came from the front of the house. Multiple vehicles, multiple men, and Dorothy May realized that Harrison's security was the same organization that had been threatening Richard all along. "Richard," she said urgently, "is there another way out of this house? The basement has an old service tunnel that connects to the neighbor's property," Richard said, his voice hollow with despair. "But it won't matter. They'll find you eventually. They found Sarah, they found Rachel. They always find everyone." "Maybe," Dorothy May said, pulling Emma from her bedroom and wrapping the trembling child in a bathrobe. "But I'm not Sarah or Rachel. And I'm not going down without a fight." The front door opened with the sound of splintering wood. They weren't bothering with subtlety anymore. Heavy footsteps echoed through the foyer, accompanied by voices speaking in what sounded like Russian. "Basement," Richard said, suddenly galvanized into action. "Follow me." They ran through the darkened house, Emma clinging to Dorothy May's neck, while Richard led them through a maze of hallways she'd never seen before. Behind them, the sounds of systematic searching grew closer, doors being kicked open, furniture being overturned, Harrison's voice directing the operation with clinical precision. The basement door was hidden behind what looked like a built-in bookshelf. Richard pressed something, and the entire unit swung inward, revealing stairs that descended into darkness. "The tunnel exits in the Hendersons' old garden shed," Richard whispered as they descended. "They're in Florida for the winter. From there you can reach the main road. What about you?" Dorothy May asked. Richard's smile was bitter. "Someone has to stay behind to convince them you went a different direction. Besides, this is my fault. Emma wouldn't be in danger if I hadn't been so weak, so greedy." "Richard, take care of my daughter," he said, pushing a thick envelope into her hands. "There's cash, contact information for Victoria's sister in Oregon, and a letter explaining everything I know about Harrison's operation. Get Emma somewhere safe, then take it to the FBI." Footsteps thundered overhead, accompanied by shouting in multiple languages. They were running out of time. "Dorothy May," Emma whispered against her neck, "are we going to be okay?" "Yes, baby girl," Dorothy May said with more confidence than she felt. "We're going to be just fine." As they entered the tunnel, a narrow, musty passage that smelled of decades of disuse, Dorothy May heard the basement door explode open behind them. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, and Harrison's voice carried clearly through the confined space. "Find them, all of them. No witnesses, no loose ends. This ends tonight." Dorothy May ran through the darkness, guided only by Richard's whispered directions and the weight of Emma in her arms. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. But ahead lay the possibility of freedom, and the chance to finally give Emma the protection she deserved. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever, but finally, Dorothy May saw a faint square of lesser darkness ahead, the exit to the Hendersons' garden shed. She pushed through the wooden door and emerged into the cool May night, gasping the sweet air of freedom. But as she set Emma down and fumbled for her phone to call 911, she realized their escape was only the beginning. Harrison and his associates wouldn't give up easily, and until they were stopped permanently, both she and Emma would be hunted prey in a game where the stakes were life and death. "Dorothy May," Emma said, tugging on her robe. "Where's Daddy?" Dorothy May looked back toward the Whitmore estate, where lights blazed in every window and the shadows of armed men moved behind the curtains. She thought of Richard's final words, his letter in her pocket, and the sacrifice he was making to buy them time. "Daddy's being very brave," she said finally. "And now we have to be brave too." In the distance, sirens began to wail. Whether coming to help or to hunt, Dorothy May couldn't tell. But she knew their night of running had only just begun. Dorothy May's hands shook as she dialed 911, crouched behind the Hendersons' garden shed with Emma pressed against her side. The sirens she'd heard were growing closer, but she couldn't tell if they were responding to her emergency or if Harrison's people had somehow turned law enforcement against them. "What's your emergency?" "This is Dorothy May Williams. I'm calling to report child abuse and kidnapping attempts at 47 Maple Ridge Drive in Scarsdale. A 4-year-old girl is in immediate danger from—" The line went dead. Dorothy May stared at her phone in disbelief. The screen showed no signal, though she'd had full bars moments before. Either the cell towers were down, or someone with serious technological resources was jamming communications in the area. Dorothy May. "I'm scared," Emma whispered, her small body trembling against the chill night air. "Where are we going?" Before Dorothy May could answer, the beam of a powerful flashlight swept across the yard behind them. Voices carried on the wind. Harrison's clipped directions and responses in what sounded like Eastern European accents. "They're not in the tunnel. Check the perimeter properties." The woman couldn't have gotten far carrying the child. Dorothy May pulled Emma deeper into the shadows of the shed, her mind racing through their limited options. Richard's envelope contained cash. She could feel the thickness of bills through the paper, but they needed transportation. And more importantly, they needed allies who couldn't be bought or intimidated by Harrison's organization. "Sweetheart," she whispered to Emma, "do you remember your mommy's phone number?" Emma nodded, then recited the digits with the precision of a child who'd been drilled in emergency procedures. Dorothy May memorized the number, though she doubted Victoria would be much help from Amsterdam. Assuming she could even be reached, the flashlight beams were getting closer, accompanied by the sound of men moving through the underbrush with military precision. Dorothy May realized they had perhaps minutes before being discovered. "We're going to play a game," she told Emma, forcing her voice to remain calm. "We're going to pretend we're invisible, and we're going to walk very quietly to find help. Can you be invisible with me?" Emma nodded solemnly, and Dorothy May was struck again by how much this child had been forced to mature beyond her years. No 4-year-old should be this good at hiding from danger. They crept away from the shed, staying low and moving from shadow to shadow across the manicured suburban landscape. Dorothy May's mind catalogued potential refugees. The main road was too exposed. The neighboring houses were dark and locked, and she had no way of knowing which residents might be connected to the network that had ensnared the Whitmores. Then she remembered Frank. The driver lived in a small apartment above the garage on the estate grounds, and he'd been the one to warn her about the fate of previous nannies. More importantly, he was the only other person who'd shown genuine concern for Emma's welfare. If anyone might help them, it would be Frank. The garage was located on the opposite side of the estate from where they'd emerged, which meant circling back toward the very place they were trying to escape. But Dorothy May couldn't think of any other option that didn't involve wandering through unfamiliar neighborhoods with a traumatized child while being hunted by professional criminals. "We're going to visit Frank," she whispered to Emma as they made their way through a neighbor's backyard. "You remember Frank, right? He drives Daddy's car." "Frank gives me peppermint sometimes," Emma said. "He has kind eyes." The observation was so perfectly innocent and accurate that Dorothy May felt her heart break a little more. Emma had been surrounded by predators and enablers for so long that basic human kindness stood out as remarkable. They reached the stone wall that marked the boundary of the Whitmore property, just as Dorothy May heard the distant sound of dogs barking. Harrison's people had brought tracking animals, which meant their scent trail would lead the hunters directly to them within minutes. "Emma, I need you to listen very carefully," Dorothy May said, kneeling to meet the child's eyes. "We're going to climb over this wall, and then we're going to run as fast as we can to Frank's apartment. No matter what happens, no matter what you see or hear, you stay with me. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, and Dorothy May boosted her up and over the wall before scrambling over herself. They landed in the familiar gardens of the estate, but now the beautiful landscaping felt like enemy territory. The garage stood about 50 yards away, its upper windows dark. Dorothy May prayed that Frank was home and alone, that he hadn't been compromised by Harrison's organization, that her desperate gamble wouldn't end with Emma being delivered directly back to her abusers. They ran across the open ground, Dorothy May's bare feet silent on the dew-soaked grass, while Emma's small legs pumped to keep up. Behind them, the sounds of the search operation were growing more organized and systematic, voices coordinating through radio static, vehicles moving into position to seal off escape routes. The external stairs to Frank's apartment were located on the side of the garage, facing away from the main house. Dorothy May climbed them two at a time, Emma in her arms, and knocked softly on the door. No answer. She knocked again, more urgently this time, and heard movement from within. A light came on, and Frank's voice called through the door. "Who's there?" "Frank, it's Dorothy May. I have Emma with me. We need help." The door opened immediately, revealing Frank in pajamas and a robe, his weathered face creased with concern and something that might have been relief. "Thank God," he said, ushering them inside. "I heard the commotion from the house, saw the cars arrive. I was afraid they'd already—" He stopped himself, glancing at Emma. "Come in, quickly." Frank's apartment was spartanly furnished, but clean and warm. He immediately went to the windows and closed the blinds, then turned to face Dorothy May with grim determination. "How bad is it?" he asked. "As bad as it gets. Harrison was with Emma tonight. Richard tried to stop it, but Harrison called in reinforcements. Men with guns, Frank. They're hunting us like animals." Frank nodded, as if he'd been expecting this news. "Richard's been walking a tightrope for months, trying to protect Emma while keeping Harrison's people from collecting their debt in more permanent ways. I guess the rope finally snapped." "You knew about the debt?" "I drive Mr. Whitmore to his meetings, Ms. Williams. I see who he talks to, hear enough of his phone calls to piece things together. Richard got involved with some very bad people when his real estate empire started collapsing. They offered him a lifeline, but the interest rates weren't financial. They were personal." Emma had curled up on Frank's small sofa, exhaustion finally overwhelming adrenaline. Her eyes were closed, but Dorothy May could tell she was listening to every word. "Frank, we need to get out of here. Can you drive us somewhere safe?" Frank was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the searchlights moving through the grounds below. "They'll be watching the roads, checking every vehicle that leaves the area. And my car?" He gestured toward the garage below. "It's registered to the estate. They'll track it immediately. Then what do we do?" "We wait until morning. Let them search themselves out, then we move when they're not expecting it." Frank went to a closet and pulled out a duffel bag. "I've been packed for weeks, ever since Ms. Petrov's visit. I figured this day was coming. We can't stay here. If they find us—" "They won't look here first," Frank said with more confidence than Dorothy May felt. "Harrison knows I'm just the help, someone who keeps his mouth shut and does his job. He'll assume we went to ground somewhere off the property." A sound from outside made them all freeze, footsteps on the gravel driveway below, accompanied by the low murmur of voices speaking Russian. Frank moved to the window and peered through a gap in the blinds. "2 men checking the garage," he whispered. "They're being thorough but not urgent. They don't expect to find anything here." Dorothy May held Emma closer, feeling the child's small body tense with fear. After several agonizing minutes, the footsteps moved away, but the sound of radio chatter continued to drift across the grounds. "Frank," Dorothy May said quietly, "what happened to Richard?" Frank's expression darkened. I saw them take him into the house about 20 minutes ago. He was walking under his own power, but he shrugged eloquently. Harrison's people are very good at extracting information. If Richard knows where you're headed, they'll get it out of him eventually. The implication hung in the air between them. Richard's sacrifice had bought them time, but that time was limited by his ability to withstand interrogation. "There's something else," Frank continued, his voice barely audible. "I overheard Harrison talking to someone on the phone earlier. They're not just after Emma for the debt anymore. Apparently, there are buyers, people who specialize in acquiring children from wealthy families for very specific purposes. Emma's blonde hair, blue eyes, her intelligence. She fits a profile that's worth serious money to the right buyers." Dorothy May felt sick. "You're saying they're planning to sell her?" "I'm saying the debt was just the excuse. Emma was always the real prize." Outside, the search seemed to be winding down, but Dorothy May knew it was only temporary. Harrison's people would regroup, expand their perimeter, and eventually check every building on the property. "In the morning," Frank said, "we're going to drive to the train station in Mount Vernon. It's far enough away that they won't expect it, and busy enough that we can disappear in the crowd. From there you can get to New York City, then anywhere you need to go." "What about you? Someone needs to stay behind to convince them you left the area entirely. Besides," Frank's smile was grim, "I've been working for this family for 3 years. I've seen enough to put Harrison and his entire organization away for life, if I can live long enough to testify." Dorothy May opened Richard's envelope and found exactly what he'd promised: several $1,000s in cash, contact information for Victoria's sister in Oregon, and a letter detailing everything he knew about Harrison's operation and its connections to organized crime. "Frank, look at this." She showed him the letter, and his eyes widened as he read. Names, dates, financial transactions. Richard documented everything. Frank whistled softly. "This is enough to bring down half the corrupt officials in Westchester County. Then we have to make sure it reaches the right people." "It will," Frank promised. "But first, we have to make sure you and Emma survive the night." As if summoned by his words, Emma stirred on the sofa, her eyes opening with the instant alertness of a child who'd learned that safety was always temporary. "Are we safe now?" she asked, her voice small in the darkness. Dorothy May looked at Frank, then at the envelope full of evidence that could save Emma, but might also get them all killed, then at the child whose trust had become the most important thing in her world. "We're getting there. Baby girl," she said, gathering Emma into her arms. "We're getting there." Outside, the hunt continued, but for the first time since discovering Harrison in Emma's room, Dorothy May felt something that might have been hope. They had evidence, they had allies, and most importantly, they had each other. The night was far from over, but morning was coming, and with it, the chance to finally give Emma the protection and justice she deserved. Dawn broke gray and cold over Westchester County, and with it came the realization that Dorothy May's hope had been premature. The sound that woke her wasn't birdsong or traffic. It was the distinctive whir of helicopter rotors cutting through the morning air. Frank was already at the window, his face grim as he watched the aircraft circle the estate grounds in methodical search patterns. "They've escalated," he said quietly. "This isn't just Harrison's security team anymore. Someone with serious resources is coordinating this operation." Dorothy May pulled Emma closer on the small sofa where they'd spent the night. The child was awake but silent, her blue eyes tracking the helicopter's movements with the resigned acceptance of someone who'd learned that danger was a constant presence in her life. "How many ways out of this property are there?" Dorothy May asked. 3 vehicle exits, but they'll all be watched now. The old service road hasn't been used in years. It's overgrown and barely passable. But it connects to the county highway about 2 miles east of here. The helicopter made another pass, lower this time, and Dorothy May could see figures rappelling down ropes into the estate's backyard. Professional operatives in tactical gear, not the well-dressed thugs who'd invaded the house the night before. Frank, this looks like military. Because it is. Harrison's bosses have connections that go way beyond organized crime. We're talking about people who can make local law enforcement stand down, who can requisition federal resources for counter-terrorism operations. Frank's voice was bitter. Emma isn't just valuable as a commodity. She's valuable as leverage against Victoria's law firm and their international clients. Before Dorothy May could respond, Frank's radio crackled to life. He'd been monitoring police frequencies all night, and now urgent voices filled the small apartment. Federal fugitive warrant issued for Dorothy May Williams, wanted in connection with kidnapping and child endangerment. Suspect considered dangerous and possibly armed. Emma Whitmore reported missing from family estate. Dorothy May felt the world tilt sideways. They're calling me the kidnapper. It's perfect cover, Frank said grimly. Now every law enforcement officer in the tri-state area is looking for you, thinking they're rescuing Emma from a dangerous criminal. If they find you, they'll return her directly to her worried parents and straight back into Harrison's hands. Emma tugged on Dorothy May's sleeve. Why are they saying you took me? You're trying to save me. The innocent question highlighted the impossible situation they faced. The very system designed to protect children had been turned against them, manipulated by people with enough power and connections to rewrite reality itself. Sometimes bad people trick good people into helping them, Dorothy May explained gently. But we know the truth, and we're going to make sure other people know it too. Frank was studying a map of the area, tracing routes with his finger. The service road is our only option now, but we'll have to go on foot. Too risky to take a vehicle. They'll spot us from the air. How far is it to the highway? 2 miles through dense woods. With Emma, Frank looked at the child, calculating. It'll take at least an hour, maybe more. Then we better get started. As Frank gathered supplies, water bottles, energy bars, a first aid kit, Dorothy May opened Richard's envelope again, this time reading his letter in detail. What she found made her blood run cold. Richard's documentation went far beyond simple financial fraud. He detailed a network that trafficked children of wealthy families, using debt and blackmail to force parents' compliance. Harrison wasn't just one predator. He was part of an organization that had been operating for years, protected by corruption that reached into law enforcement, child services, and the courts themselves. Frank, look at this list of names. She showed him a page covered with Richard's desperate handwriting. Judges, FBI agents, state senators, all of them compromised or complicit. Frank scanned the list, his face growing pale. This explains how they can mobilize federal resources so quickly. Half these people owe their careers to staying quiet about what they've seen. The helicopter was circling closer now, and through the windows they could see tactical teams moving systematically through the estate grounds. It was only a matter of time before they reached the garage. We have to go now, Frank said, shouldering his duffel bag. There's a maintenance shed about half a mile into the woods. We can hide there while they search the immediate area. Dorothy May wrapped Emma in Frank's spare jacket and checked her own pockets. The envelope with Richard's evidence, her phone still without signal, and the photograph of her own children that she carried everywhere. If they didn't survive this, she wanted them to know she'd tried to do the right thing. They slipped out the back of Frank's apartment and into the woods that bordered the estate. The trees provided cover from the helicopter, but the spring undergrowth was thick and difficult to navigate with a 4-year-old in tow. Emma proved remarkably resilient, keeping up with their pace without complaint, though Dorothy May could see the exhaustion in her small face. This child had been through more trauma in one night than most people experienced in a lifetime. Are we going to see Daddy again? Emma asked, as they paused to rest beside a fallen tree. Dorothy May exchanged glances with Frank. Richard's fate was uncertain at best, and probably far worse than they wanted to acknowledge. Your daddy loves you very much, Dorothy May said carefully. He's the one who gave us the information we need to keep you safe. Is he in trouble because he helped us? The question was too perceptive, too adult for a 4-year-old to be asking. Dorothy May realized that Emma understood far more about their situation than any child should have to. Sometimes grown-ups have to make very hard choices to protect the people they love, she said finally. Your daddy made the right choice. They reached the maintenance shed just as the sound of search dogs began echoing through the forest. Frank had been right. Harrison's people were being extremely thorough. The shed was little more than a wooden shelter filled with rusted gardening equipment, but it was hidden by overgrown vines and far enough from the main property to escape immediate attention. They'll find us eventually, Frank said, checking his watch. We've got maybe an hour before the dogs pick up our scent trail. Dorothy May's phone suddenly chirped with an incoming signal. The display showed 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages, all received during the brief moment when cellular service had returned. Most of the messages were from her family in Mississippi, but one stood out, a text from an unknown number sent just 20 minutes ago. Ms. Williams, this is Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Child Exploitation Task Force. We've been investigating the network you've uncovered. Richard Whitmore contacted us before his disappearance. We can help, but you need to get to a public location immediately. Do not trust local law enforcement. Dorothy May stared at the message, her heart racing. Either it was legitimate help, or it was a trap set by people sophisticated enough to know exactly what she'd want to hear. Frank, look at this. He read the message, frowning. Could be real. The FBI has been investigating child trafficking networks for years, and Richard was desperate enough to reach out to anyone who might help. Or it could be Harrison's people, using exactly the right words to lure us into the open. Before Frank could respond, Emma's sharp intake of breath drew their attention to the woods around them. Through the trees, they could see figures in tactical gear moving in their direction, accompanied by German shepherds straining against their leashes. They're not waiting for the dogs to track us, Frank whispered. They're doing a grid search. Dorothy May made a decision that would either save them or doom them. She typed a quick response to the FBI agent. Prove you're legitimate. What was Richard's code name for Harrison in his documentation? The response came back within seconds. Dr. Jekyll, Richard, documented everything, including the systematic abuse of Emma and at least 6 other children over the past 3 years. Only someone who'd actually read Richard's letter would know that detail. Dorothy May felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. If this was real, help was finally coming. If it was a trap, they were about to walk directly into Harrison's hands. We're taking the chance, she told Frank. We can't run forever, and Emma deserves better than hiding in sheds. Frank nodded grimly. The highway's still our best bet. It's public, visible, harder for them to simply disappear us. They began moving again, but this time with desperate urgency. Behind them, the search teams were closing in, and ahead lay either salvation or a trap that would end Emma's chances of ever experiencing a normal childhood. As they pushed through the undergrowth, Dorothy May's phone buzzed with another message from Agent Chen. Moving to intercept. Look for white SUV with emergency lights. Do not approach any other vehicles. Dorothy May, Emma whispered, tugging on her hand. Are the good guys really coming to help us? Dorothy May looked down at this brave, traumatized little girl who'd endured so much while maintaining her faith that good people still existed in the world. Yes, baby girl, she said with more certainty than she felt. The good guys are coming. Behind them, the sound of pursuit was growing closer. Ahead, the trees were beginning to thin, revealing glimpses of the highway that represented either freedom or a final trap. Dorothy May clutched Richard's evidence tighter and ran toward whatever awaited them, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether Emma's story ended in rescue or tragedy. The helicopter's rotors grew louder overhead, but this time Dorothy May thought she heard something different in the sound. Not the predatory hunting of the earlier aircraft, but the purposeful approach of potential salvation. Time would tell if her hope was justified, or if it was simply the last delusion of a woman who'd tried to save a child and failed. The highway stretched before them like a ribbon of hope, morning traffic beginning to build as commuters headed toward the city. Dorothy May clutched Emma's hand as they emerged from the tree line, both of them dirty, exhausted, and running on nothing but determination and desperate faith. A white SUV with emergency lights sat on the shoulder exactly where Agent Chen had promised, its occupants scanning the area with professional alertness. But Dorothy May's relief was tempered by caution. She'd learned too much about deception and manipulation to trust appearances alone. Dorothy May Williams? A woman emerged from the SUV, her FBI credentials held high and visible. Agent Sarah Chen was younger than Dorothy May had expected, perhaps 35, with short black hair and eyes that held both authority and genuine compassion. "I'm Agent Chen. This is Agent Rodriguez, and Agent Thompson is coordinating tactical support." "How do I know you're really FBI?" Dorothy May asked, positioning herself protectively in front of Emma. Agent Chen understood the wariness immediately. "Richard Whitmore contacted our task force 3 days ago through an encrypted tip line. He provided documentation of financial crimes connected to child trafficking, specifically mentioning a man calling himself Dr. Harrison, who was systematically abusing his daughter Emma." She crouched to Emma's eye level. "Hello, Emma. Your daddy asked us to make sure you stay safe." Emma studied Agent Chen with the careful assessment of a child who'd learned to evaluate adult intentions. "Are you going to arrest Dorothy May? The radio said she kidnapped me." "No, sweetheart. Dorothy May is a hero. She saved you from some very bad people." Agent Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "The radio got it wrong because the bad people have friends who can lie to police officers, but we know the truth." Behind them, the sound of helicopters was growing closer, but now Dorothy May could see 2 aircraft approaching, and one was clearly marked with FBI insignia. "We need to move quickly," Agent Rodriguez said, a tall Hispanic man with the bearing of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. "Harrison's people have significant resources, and they're not going to give up easily." As they climbed into the SUV, Dorothy May handed over Richard's envelope. "This documents everything: names, dates, financial transactions, the entire network." Agent Chen's eyes widened as she scanned the contents. "This is incredible. We've been trying to penetrate this organization for 2 years. Richard gave us enough evidence to roll up the entire East Coast operation." "What about Richard?" Dorothy May asked. "Is he alive?" Agent Chen confirmed. "In federal protective custody as of 6 hours ago. He's cooperating fully with our investigation." Emma's face lit up for the first time in days. "Daddy's okay?" "Your daddy is going to be fine, Emma. He made some mistakes, but he's helping us catch the bad people who were hurting you." As the SUV pulled onto the highway, Dorothy May finally allowed herself to breathe. Through the rear window, she could see the Whitmore estate swarming with federal agents, the tactical teams that had been hunting them now working to arrest Harrison's associates. "How did you get involved so quickly?" Dorothy May asked. "Richard reached out to us Tuesday night after he walked in on Harrison with Emma," Agent Chen explained. "He was desperate, terrified, but determined to stop what was happening to his daughter. We'd been investigating similar cases, wealthy families whose children were being systematically abused by people connected to organized crime. The other families, were they trapped the same way Richard was? Debt, blackmail, threats against other family members. The organization is very sophisticated in how they identify and compromise potential victims. Agent Rodriguez was coordinating through his radio, and Dorothy May caught fragments of updates. Harrison in custody. Financial records seized. Warrant executed on Petrov residence. "Is it over?" Dorothy May asked, hardly daring to hope. "The immediate threat to Emma is over," Agent Chen said carefully, "but prosecuting everyone involved will take time. This network has been operating for years, and they have connections throughout law enforcement and government." Emma had fallen asleep against Dorothy May's shoulder, finally succumbing to the exhaustion that adrenaline had kept at bay. Looking down at the child's peaceful face, Dorothy May felt a mixture of relief and lingering concern. What happens to Emma now? "That's complicated," Agent Chen admitted. "Richard will face charges for his role in the financial crimes, but his cooperation and the evidence he provided will likely result in reduced sentences." Victoria. She paused. "Victoria's situation is more complex. We're still investigating her knowledge of what was happening to Emma." "She knew," Dorothy May said quietly. "Maybe not the details, but she knew something was wrong and chose to ignore it." Proving willful neglect versus willful ignorance is difficult in court. But Emma won't be returned to an unsafe environment. I can promise you that. The SUV pulled into a federal building in White Plains, where Dorothy May could see media vans already gathering. The story was breaking: wealthy real estate developer, international law firm, organized crime, child trafficking. It would dominate headlines for weeks. "Ms. Williams," Agent Chen said, as they prepared to enter the building, "I need you to understand what you've accomplished here. Your courage and Emma's safety may have saved dozens of other children. This network was expanding, becoming more sophisticated. You stopped them. Inside the federal building, Dorothy May was debriefed by multiple agents, each session revealing new aspects of the conspiracy she'd unwittingly infiltrated. Harrison wasn't just a predator, he was a recruiter for an international trafficking network that specialized in children from wealthy families. The Whitmore case was their East Coast pilot program. How many other families were involved? Dorothy May asked during one session. We're still investigating, but at least 12 families in the tri-state area, possibly more in other regions. Agent Thompson, a veteran investigator with 20 years' experience, looked genuinely shaken by the scope of what they'd uncovered. Your evidence allowed us to connect cases across multiple states. Meanwhile, Emma was being cared for by child psychologists specially trained in trauma cases. Through the one-way window of the interview room, Dorothy May could see her playing with toys while talking to Dr. Martinez, a specialist in child testimony. "How is she doing?" Dorothy May asked Dr. Martinez during a break. "Remarkably resilient, considering what she's been through. She has a strong attachment to you, which has been crucial in her ability to trust other adults. That attachment may have literally saved her psychological development." What happens to her now? That depends on several factors. Richard's custody, rights, Victoria's involvement, the availability of suitable relatives. Dr. Martinez studied Dorothy May carefully. "Emma has specifically requested that you be involved in her care going forward. That's not legally binding, but courts do consider a child's expressed preferences, especially in cases like this." 3 days later, Dorothy May sat in a different kind of courtroom, family court, where Emma's immediate custody was being determined. Richard appeared via video link from the federal facility where he was being held, looking older and more broken than she'd ever seen him. "Your Honor," Richard's voice was steady despite his circumstances, "I want to state for the record that Dorothy May Williams saved my daughter's life. If she hadn't intervened when she did, Emma would have suffered far more than she already has. I formally request that Ms. Williams be considered for guardianship pending the resolution of the criminal cases." Victoria, appearing via video from Amsterdam, where she was cooperating with international investigators, was less supportive. While I appreciate Ms. Williams' concern for Emma, she's not family. My sister in Oregon is better equipped to provide stable care. But when the judge asked Emma privately what she wanted, the child's answer was clear. I want to stay with Dorothy May. She keeps me safe, and she doesn't lie to me. The custody hearing was continued pending further investigation. But Emma was placed in Dorothy May's temporary care, with social services supervision and psychological support. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe. 2 weeks later, Dorothy May sat in the garden of the small house she'd rented in Mount Vernon, watching Emma play on a swing set that had seen better days but belonged to them. The child was laughing, actually laughing, as Dorothy May pushed her higher and higher. "Dorothy May," Emma called out. "Will you teach me to make those chocolate chip cookies again?" "Of course, baby girl. We can make them whenever you want." Her phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chen. "Harrison pleaded guilty to federal trafficking charges this morning. 25 years to life. Thought you should know." Dorothy May closed her eyes and felt some of the tension she'd been carrying finally begin to release. Emma was safe, the predators were in prison, and for the first time in months the future looked hopeful. "Higher," Emma called out, her voice full of the joy that had been stolen from her but was slowly returning. "Hold on tight," Dorothy May said, pushing the swing toward the blue sky above them. "We're going to go as high as you want." As Emma soared through the air, her blonde hair streaming behind her and her laughter echoing across the small yard, Dorothy May realized that sometimes the most important victories were measured not in justice served, but in the sound of a child's unfettered joy. There would be more court dates, more testimony, more bureaucratic hurdles to navigate. But for now, Emma was safe and she was laughing, and that was enough. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Dorothy May stood in the kitchen of their new home in Albany, watching Emma help her younger daughter Shayla frost cupcakes for Emma's 5th birthday party. The scene was chaotic in the best possible way. Flour dusting every surface, frosting smeared on small fingers, and the kind of genuine laughter that had taken months of therapy and patience to fully restore. "Mama, Emma's putting too much sprinkles on hers," Shayla complained with the mock outrage of an 8-year-old who took baking very seriously. "There's no such thing as too many sprinkles on your birthday," Dorothy May replied, ruffling both girls' hair with hands that had finally stopped shaking when unexpected sounds woke her at night. The custody battle had been resolved 3 months earlier, with Dorothy May officially awarded guardianship of Emma, pending Richard's release from federal prison in 18 months. Victoria had voluntarily relinquished her parental rights, choosing instead to rebuild her career in international law while dealing with her own legal troubles related to money laundering charges. "I failed her," Victoria had said during their final meeting, her usual composure cracked with genuine remorse. "I chose my career over my daughter's safety, and I have to live with that. But Emma deserves better than a mother who was too selfish to see what was happening in her own home." It had taken Dorothy May months to accept that some people could change, that Victoria's decision to step away wasn't abandonment, but perhaps the most loving choice she was capable of making. The kitchen door opened, and Marcus, Dorothy May's eldest at 22, entered carrying grocery bags and wearing the scrubs of his new job as a hospital orderly, the first step toward his dream of becoming a nurse. "How are my favorite little bakers?" he asked, swooping to kiss both girls on their foreheads. "Marcus!" Emma squealed, throwing her arms around his waist with the easy affection that had taken her months to show anyone other than Dorothy May. "We're making birthday cupcakes." "I can see that. Looks like you're wearing more frosting than you're putting on the cupcakes." The casual family interaction was something Dorothy May never took for granted. Emma's integration into their family had been a gradual process. facilitated by weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Martinez and the patient understanding of Marcus, Keisha, and Shayla, who had welcomed their new sister with remarkable grace. "Dorothy May," Emma said, using the formal name she'd never quite abandoned, despite being encouraged to call her Mama, like the other children. "Is Daddy really coming to my party tomorrow?" "He'll be here," Dorothy May confirmed. Richard's supervised visits had become a monthly occurrence, carefully monitored but increasingly natural as Emma learned to separate the father who loved her from the man who had failed to protect her. "He's bringing that photo album he's been working on, pictures of you from when you were a baby." Emma's smile was radiant. The relationship with her father was complicated and would probably always carry scars, but it was real and growing stronger with each visit. Richard's testimony had been crucial in dismantling the trafficking network, and his genuine remorse and commitment to making amends had impressed even the federal prosecutors. The doorbell rang, and Dorothy May wiped her hands on her apron before answering. Agent Chen stood on the porch, but this wasn't an official visit. She'd become something like a family friend over the months of testimony and court proceedings. "Sarah," Emma called out, running to hug the FBI agent who'd been one of the first adults to treat her with consistent honesty and respect. "We're making cupcakes." "I can see that. And smell it. They smell amazing." Agent Chen held up a wrapped package. "I brought an early birthday present." "You didn't have to do that," Dorothy May said, but she was touched by the gesture. The law enforcement community had rallied around Emma's case, understanding that her recovery was as important as the criminal prosecutions. "Actually, I wanted to give you both an update on the broader case," Agent Chen said as they settled in the living room while the girls continued their baking project under Marcus's supervision. "More arrests?" Better than that. The International Task Force has identified and rescued 43 children from similar networks across 7 countries. Emma's case broke open an entire trafficking pipeline that we didn't even know existed. Dorothy May felt a familiar mixture of pride and heartbreak. Emma's courage in finally speaking the truth had saved dozens of other children, but it had come at such a high personal cost. "How is she really doing?" Agent Chen asked, watching Emma through the kitchen doorway, where she was carefully placing a cherry on each cupcake. "Better than I dared hope. The nightmares have mostly stopped. She's doing well in kindergarten, and she's starting to trust that good things can be permanent." Dorothy May paused. "Though she still checks the locks on her bedroom door every night, and she won't sleep without lights on. That's normal and healthy, given what she experienced. Dr. Martinez says her progress is remarkable." "She's remarkable," Dorothy May said simply. "I've learned more about resilience from a 5-year-old than I thought possible." That evening, after the birthday preparations were complete and the other children were in bed, Dorothy May sat with Emma in the rocking chair that had become their special place for bedtime stories and quiet conversations. "Dorothy May," Emma said, her voice sleepy but serious, "do you think the bad dreams will ever go away completely?" It was a question Emma asked periodically, and Dorothy May had learned to answer with honesty rather than false reassurance. "They might, sweetheart, or they might just visit less often. But even if they don't go away completely, you're getting stronger all the time. And you'll never have to face them alone. Because we're family now." "Because we're family now," Dorothy May confirmed, kissing the top of Emma's head. "Forever family, even when I grow up and move away." "Even then, family doesn't end when you grow up. It just gets bigger as you add more people to love." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Dorothy May reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. She'd taken a job as a nanny to support her own children, never imagining she'd end up adopting another daughter or becoming instrumental in bringing down an international criminal organization. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ruby back in Mississippi. "Saw your interview on CNN. So proud of you, sis." Mama would be proud, too. The media attention had been overwhelming at first, but Dorothy May had learned to use it strategically, advocating for better protection of domestic workers who might witness abuse and pushing for reforms in how child trafficking cases were investigated. "You've become quite the activist," Keisha had teased during her last visit from college. Who knew our quiet mama had a crusader hiding inside her? But Dorothy May didn't see herself as a crusader, just as a woman who'd been in the right place at the right time, with enough courage to do what needed doing. The real heroes were people like Emma, who survived unimaginable trauma and still managed to trust and love and hope. The next morning brought chaos as 5 children prepared for Emma's birthday party, the first real party she'd ever had, complete with neighborhood friends from kindergarten, elaborate decorations, and enough cake to feed half of Albany. "Are you nervous about seeing so many people?" Dorothy May asked Emma as they hung streamers in the backyard. "A little," Emma admitted. "But Shayla says birthday parties are supposed to be loud and messy, and that sounds fun." "They are supposed to be loud and messy, and full of people who care about you." When Richard arrived for his supervised visit, Emma ran to him with the unself-conscious joy of a child who'd learned to separate past hurts from present love. He looked healthier than he had in months, the grey complexion of stress replaced by the ruddy appearance of someone who'd been working outdoors in the prison garden program. "Happy birthday, Princess," he said, lifting her into a careful hug. 5 years old. "I can hardly believe it. I lost 2 teeth, Emma announced, displaying the gaps in her smile with pride. "And I can write my whole name, and I know all my letters." "That's wonderful. I'm so proud of you." Dorothy May watched the interaction with the complex emotions that had become familiar. Joy at seeing Emma's healing, sadness for all the normal father-daughter moments that trauma had stolen, and hope that their relationship could continue to rebuild despite everything. The party was a glorious success, children shrieking with laughter on the backyard swing set Dorothy May had installed, parents chatting over coffee while keeping half an eye on the chaos, and Emma at the center of it all, glowing with the attention and affection she'd been denied for so long. "Make a wish, Emma," the children chanted as she leaned over her birthday cake, 5 candles flickering in the afternoon breeze. Emma closed her eyes, her face serious with concentration. When she opened them and blew out the candles in one breath, the assembled crowd cheered. "What did you wish for?" Shayla asked, bouncing with curiosity. "I can't tell." "Or it won't come true," Emma said, with the wisdom of someone who'd learned that some things were too precious to risk. But later that evening, as Dorothy May tucked her into bed, surrounded by new toys and cards from friends, Emma whispered her wish. "I wished that all the children like me would find someone like you to keep them safe." Dorothy May felt tears prick her eyes. After everything Emma had been through, her birthday wish hadn't been for herself, but for other children, still trapped in the darkness she'd escaped. "That's a beautiful wish. Sweetheart, do you think it will come true?" Dorothy May thought about Agent Chen's update, about the international task force still working to dismantle trafficking networks, about the other brave children who would find their voices and the adults who would listen. "I think," she said carefully, "that wishes like yours have a way of coming true when people work hard to make them happen." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Dorothy May sat in the rocking chair and looked out at the quiet street where other families were settling in for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more therapy sessions, continued legal proceedings, and the daily work of helping a traumatized child continue to heal. But tonight, Emma was safe and loved and surrounded by family who would never let her face danger alone. Tonight, a little girl who had endured unimaginable horror was dreaming dreams of hope and healing. And in a house that had once known only fear and secrets, There was now laughter and light, and the promise of a future built on truth and love. Dorothy Mae Williams had taken a job to support her family and had ended up changing the world. One child, one moment of courage, one refusal to look away at a time. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell. And if you watched all the way to the end, comment "I watched till the end" and leave your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's really exciting for you.